And thank you indeed to everybody for the wonderful introduction and for those who got up early in particular, staying up late. I'm very, very grateful. I'm very privileged indeed to have had the opportunity. So if you bear with me one sec, I'm going to try and share my screen. And I'm hoping now that you can see that. Okay. Just to say, firstly, I suppose that it is a real privilege to be here with everybody today. And I have to admit, I feel somewhat undeserving of the opportunity. There are so many, many other voices that could have been invited into this space. So it is with deep gratitude that I'm speaking to you this morning from Kinnegad in the middle of Ireland about the work at the Interprovincial Justice Desk. And interprovincial because, as Karen said, I work in two countries really, but there are in Ireland and in England, but there are two provinces of Presentation Sisters in Ireland, and there is one in England. And this year happens to mark the 10th year of the Justice Desk in Ireland and England. So it's a particularly fitting time, I suppose, with which we might reflect on what we've done, especially as we celebrate in this Jubilee year. So it's an appropriate time, I suppose, to pause, to reflect, to look back, and to consider what we have built and what continues to grow. But this presentation, it's not really just about sharing information. It's about something much deeper. It's about a spirit, a calling. It's about a legacy. We're gathered as friends, as companions of Nan O'Neill. And in one way or other, each of us has been touched by something beyond ourselves. We're connected by a shared sense of purpose. One that finds its roots in Nano's vision and continues to live on through Catholic social teaching and the work at the Justice Desk. I was asked, I suppose, to speak about the importance of Catholic social teaching as both an imperative and a driving force behind the work at the Justice Desk. But to be honest, the most compelling witness to Catholic social teaching is Nan O'Neill herself. We know that Catholic social teaching reminds us that we're not meant to live in isolation and that every person has dignity, every voice matters. And we see this lived out so powerfully in Nano's life through her schools and her outreach. She built communities that deliberately included those who were pushed to the margins. The message that echoes clearly from her time into ours is simple but deeply challenging. We are stronger when no one is left out. That message became the heartbeat of the Justice Desk when it was established in October of 2016. From the very beginning, we were called to collaborate across these provinces, across boundaries, and beyond our own circles, linking with others whose work speaks to our shared mission. When I began in the role, I was told that my task was to help us put our collective best foot forward, but that the only way to do that was to truly become part of the collective, to listen, to stand together, and to speak and act as one. Because ultimately, it's not about who does the work, it's about ensuring that the work is done and that it's done in the right way. That means honoring lived experience so that those voices shape what we do and not just appear within it. And I was given one clear instruction that stayed with me ever since. Whatever you do, bring people with you, bring others along, make space, build something that is shared. If we take a moment to reflect, we might ask ourselves, what does it mean really to be present to the needs of our time? And more importantly, what does it mean to be truly present to those who are most in need of our time? When I sit with those questions, and especially when I consider them in the light of Nan O'Neill, I'm struck by how she answered them. She answered with courage, with compassion, and above all, she answered with action. But she did so in the context where responding carried a real risk. To act as she did was radical. Today we're in a different context. Ireland is in many ways a safe country, as is England. Speaking out, questioning decisions, even criticising the government, these are not only permitted, they are part of what strengthens a healthy society. A confident nation makes space for critique. It grows because of it. Ireland and England stand as strong supporters of the multilateral system and that shared pursuit of justice. But when I think back to Nano's time, I imagine her presence as something very direct, something that is clear, grounded, quietly uncompromising, not imposing, but not retreating either. She was a quiet leader, a moral authority, unassuming yet very resolute. She didn't lead with force and spectacle, but by example. There was no positioning, there was no political maneuvering, no self-interest. There was that simple willingness to advocate, to stand, to risk, to act. And the truth is, people like that thankfully still exist. We see them in our world today. We encounter them in this work. And in the role that I have, I'm privileged to meet so many of them, people who every day choose courage, compassion, and action in response to the needs of our time. I think of Nan O'Neill as a courageous woman in a dangerous time. And in truth, that is still the reality for some of our sisters today. She was fearless in the face of opposition, but deeply compassionate. She doesn't strike me as somebody who waited for permission. And I have met many like that in the presentation order and in the presentation family. She stepped into the darkness, but carried her light with her. And even 250 years on, that same fearlessness is still needed. Nano's charism is not something confined to history, it is alive. It is compassion that softens suffering. It is justice that challenges the unjust systems. It is presence that stays, especially when it would be easier to walk away. It is courage that is willing to take risks. But Nano is human after all. She must have been afraid. There must have been others who were afraid for her. So the question for us is, where do we see that spirit today? Do we recognize it in the people we encounter? Do we recognize it in those we work alongside? And perhaps most challenging of all, do we recognize it in ourselves? When we reflect deeply on Catholic social teaching, we are reminded of a fundamental truth that every single person is made in the image of God and that no one is less important than another. Nan O'Neill clearly saw this. She recognized the dignity in poor children whom others ignored. She treated them with respect, with care, and with love, just as she did those who were sick or forgotten. Every person deserved to be seen, to be valued, to be cherished, and she lived that belief. We're also reminded that we belong to one another. We are not meant to live in isolation. Every person has a voice, and every voice matters. Catholic social teaching tells us that people have rights, the right to education, to food, to shelter, and that alongside those rights comes a responsibility to care for one another. Nano defended the right to education. She took responsibility for those who were poor. And at its simplest, perhaps the lesson is, if I have something, I can share it. But there is also a deeper challenge, a challenge to accept responsibility, not just in charity, but in advocacy, to speak, to act, and to seek change. This brings us to the principle of the preferential option for the poor, a call to prioritize those who are most vulnerable. It echoes in today's global vision, especially in the commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, where we have that phrase, to leave no one behind. And even further, it's strengthened when we say we must reach the furthest behind first. And yet there is that question we must hold. Why do we so often focus on why people are left behind, rather than asking why are so many people so far ahead?
This is this thing on Nano.
Oh. I haven't had a chance to look at that. It is 11, isn't it?
Nano did not hesitate.
I'm pretty sure it is, because I just said to Margaret, we're leaving at 10. I'm pretty sure it's 11.
Nano did not hesitate. She chose to serve.
I can't find it at all.
Mary Hanson, you might mute your machine, please. Thank you. Nano did not hesitate. She chose to serve. She focused her attention on those most in need. For her, justice, I think, began with the most vulnerable. It was not optional. It was a moral priority. She didn't simply offer charity. She called for justice. And when we consider care for creation, the message feels even more urgent than ever. The world is God's gift entrusted to us. How can people be healthy on a sick planet? Those who contribute least to the environmental harm that we see are often those who suffer its consequences first, fastest, and most deeply. So we're called to live simply, to act sustainably, and to truly leave no one behind. In many ways, we now articulate through teachings like Laudato Si that we're already alive in Nano's time. Her life reflected an understanding of care, of connection, and responsibility that we are only now fully beginning to understand. When we look at the work at the Justice Desk over the past 10 years, it is clear that much has changed and not always for the better. Back in 2015, there was a real sense of hope. It was the year Laudato Si was published, and the launch of the Sustainable Development Goals. There was a global movement that seemed to lean towards cooperation, towards compassion and shared responsibility. We had the COP agreement. Leaders like Barack Obama spoke a language of inclusion and possibility. There was a real sense of kindness in politics, an openness to the stranger, a belief that we could move forward together. But much of that has shifted, particularly in the last number of years. We've lived through COVID. We've faced an energy crisis. There's more conflict in the world today than there has ever been in recent memory. We are witnessing an increasing violence against women and girls. The gap between the poor and the rich continues to widen despite all efforts. And now we speak of a working poor, a phrase that would previously have seemed contradictory, but it's now a lived reality for many. We continue to pursue constant economic growth, even though we must question what that growth truly serves. These are not distant or abstract issues. They affect real people, real families, real communities. They are touching more lives than ever before. And yet, even in the midst of this darkness, it only takes the smallest light to change it. And this is where the legacy of Nano Nagle speaks most powerfully to us. Just as she responded to the realities of her time, we're being called to respond to the realities of ours. And are we not being asked to do the same, to continue what she began, to hold steady when we feel discouraged, and to resist the temptation to give up? Because it is her belief, her faith, her story, her work that have shaped something within us, a quiet but determined resolve. A strength that reminds us that the work must go on. And perhaps the most importantly is that it must go on precisely when it feels hardest to do so. The mission of the Justice Desk across Ireland and England is not simply to collaborate, though collaboration is at its heart. It is to bring presentation values to the reality of today's world, to advocate, to collaborate, to act, to connect local experience with global justice. But it is also to reflect, because meaningful action must be rooted in thoughtful reflection and awareness of what is happening, why it is happening, and how we can be called to respond. That advocacy takes many forms. For example, research, reporting, attending, alerting, representing. Work that is sometimes quiet, sometimes unseen, but very often necessary. And I believe that this, in many ways, is a modern expression of the mission first lived out by Nano Nagle, a mission that continues to evolve, but remains grounded in that same call to see clearly, to respond courageously, and to act with and for others in the pursuit of justice. The Justice Desk in Ireland and England engages deeply with a wide range of local issues alongside NGOs and civil society organisations with whom we share a common purpose. For example, our involvement in Altogether Dignity in Ireland reflects a commitment to recognising a lived experience as a true expertise. It is about ensuring that those who have experienced poverty are not spoken for, but enabled to speak for themselves, to offer testimony, insight and leadership. In line with our IPA commitments to ending violence against women and girls, we engage in efforts to combat human trafficking here in Ireland, across Europe and also globally. But the reality is that when trafficking surfaces in Ireland, its roots lie far beyond our shores. These are not isolated concerns. They are interconnected, and they are very much the kinds of issues that would have been at the heart of the work of Nano Nagle. Migration too has become a pressing issue. Ireland has long been known as the land of 1,000 welcomes, but that spirit is being tested, not just in Ireland. The welcome is not always as open or as generous as it once was, and we are seeing a rise of voices that seek to turn away those most in need. Climate justice is another focus, and human dignity being central to it. And all of these spaces one thing matters deeply, that the faith-based voice is present, that is willing to speak, willing to challenge, and when necessary, willing to say what's not right and that we can't agree with everything. That presence matters. That voice matters. They're not always easy things to say, but they are important things to say. And so these are some of the areas in which we find ourselves engaged, seeking in each case to respond with integrity, with courage, and with a commitment to justice. Since the foundation of the Justice Desk, we have witnessed a profound change, not all of it, as we say, for the better. We've lived through this rapid digital transformation, recognizing that growth of the digital divide, where more and more being left behind. We're witnessing an increased global instability, arguably the greatest since World War II. We see the strain on multilateralism, a growing lack of respect for institutions like the United Nations, which were established to uphold peace, dignity, and cooperation. We continue to feel the deep and lasting impact of COVID, especially on those who are most vulnerable. And through all of this, one thing has become increasingly clear. That need for collaboration has never been greater. But more than that, the need for heart, for courage, for moral clarity has never been greater. And that need for the spirit and example of Nano Nagle. Her life reminds us that even in times of uncertainty and even in times of fear, it is possible to act, to respond, and to stand with each other. And perhaps that's what's most important for us to hold on to, that her example is not something distant or unattainable. It is something we are invited to live, to trust that we bring our voice, our presence, our willingness, and that this might be enough, but that together we can make the difference. Working at the Justice Desk is, as I say, a real privilege. It has offered a unique insight into the world and the work of the United Nations through the IPA and in other organizations with UN status. The opportunity to participate meaningfully at the UN in Geneva, where we have been able to contribute to the Universal Periodic Review and at the Commission on Status of Women. And at the heart of all this work is a simple but powerful responsibility to speak where others do not have the opportunity to speak. I remember being reminded of what we call the 2 feet approach, where the presentation sisters would use one foot to serve and to do, while the other foot was to advocate for the change that meant then that those who were furthest behind would not have to put up with some of the difficulties that were shared. So that 2 feet approach is something that I kind of carry with me in my mind as we begin our work. We need to recognize that what may feel ordinary to us, the ability to speak or to question or to challenge, is for others an unreachable reality. And this might be an uncomfortable truth in some countries. And it is also a call that we have inherited from Nano's life and witness, to be present, to be courageous, and to ensure that those furthest behind are not left unheard. It's important, I suppose, to recognize that some of the most meaningful work of the Justice Desk has been done when we work collaboratively. Collaboration is like any other relationship. It doesn't happen by accident. It has to be built, nurtured, and sustained. It asks something of us. It asks us to be open, to be willing to listen. It asks us to commit, to contribute in a constructive way. It's not just simply about being present in a network or holding a place or a space. It's about making the difference within those spaces, bringing something of value, of substance, of integrity. And when collaboration is real, it becomes mutual. It's not only about reaching out to others, but it's about others recognizing that we have something to offer, seeking our input, our perspective, our experience, or our connections. And in that sense, collaboration becomes a two-way street. We're part of many such partnerships, like, for example, Renata, which are the Religious in Europe networking against trafficking and exploitation, or Coalition 2030, where we work towards the implementation of the SDGs. We are the only faith-based group within that coalition, but we are welcomed. And for that, we have our own particular message, I suppose. We recognize that in some spaces, the faith-based perspective is necessary in an increasingly secular world. A perspective that continues to insist on dignity, compassion, and justice. But we are also responding to this changing world, a world where kindness can be seen to be disappearing. Tolerance is now being regarded as a weakness. where generosity is undervalued and profit is being elevated above people, where there is a risk that we become accustomed to violence and indifferent to suffering. In that context, collaboration becomes even more important because it's through working with others that we have a real impact. It is through shared efforts that we can resist indifference and renew hope. And in all of this, we take our lead from Nano Nagle, carrying forward her witness, living out her charism, and bringing it to new spaces, new conversations, and new frontiers, because it is there, often at the edges or at the intersections, at the places of greatest need, that this spirit will have its deepest and most meaningful impact. Through our experience of collaboration, we have come to recognize something essential, that justice is strongest when it is shared, not just an idea, it is community in action. And if I'm honest, I didn't fully understand the power of that until I began to realize that when we came together, we could feel the spirit move. And this brings us to young people and the hope that we place in them. Our role is not just to include them in a tokenistic way, nor to speak down to them, nor assume that they are simply there to be instructed. But we are called to recognize their passion, to understand the world that they're growing into, that it is changing, and perhaps more rapidly for them than it was for us, to see their eagerness, their willingness, and their desire to make a difference, to understand that sometimes action is the antidote to anxiety. And so we encourage the passion and we empower their efforts. And we consider groups like Challenge to Change, a presentation initiative, or Global Citizenship School, listening to young voices, encouraging action and awareness. And so we're considering what it means when we listen, when we truly listen, not just to respond, but to understand, and not just to hear, but to act afterwards. So we must ask ourselves, how well do we really listen? Because listening deeply is what Nano did herself. We recognize that call, we recognize and we respond in a way that empowers others. Through programs, as I say, like Global Citizenship School and Challenge to Change, we can make that difference. I spoke earlier about the power of being present, and I've just reflected, I suppose, on the need to listen deeply, because listening, responding, and being aware are not separate things. They're all part of what it means to be truly present. To be present with people, I suppose, is to listen deeply, but it is also to stand in solidarity. And when we think of Nano, perhaps her greatest gift was not what she did, but how she was present. She noticed, she listened, she stayed. And that kind of presence is what we're called to embody. It means not being afraid to speak, not being afraid to step forward and to be included, and not being afraid to be wrong, to act courageously. It's important because presence isn't about perfection. It's about honesty and courage. It's about showing up fully and being with others. Much of the work of the Justice Desk has been done by a team of 4. I work with 3 other sisters. I call them my boss ladies. I don't think they're here this evening. They don't mind me saying that too much, but they are a fantastic team. So we meet monthly to discuss what's happening, what we should do, what we might do. But even though it's a small team, the work is very much part of a collective of others and meeting others, because our mission is a shared mission. We rely on the support of many with whom we work. We bring our skills, our strengths, and our ideas, but we also recognize our limits. And in doing so, we invite others to bring their strengths to ours. So there's a reciprocity in our work. We try to strengthen one another. We try to connect in every way that we can, linking the local and the global, connecting sisters with associates and partners in mission, connecting voices in action and reflecting in response. And through all of this, we come to recognize something essential, that we're much bigger than, we're part of something far bigger than ourselves. And we are held within a shared story, a shared purpose that's rooted in the charism of Nano, a charism that continues to move, to call, and to inspire, and a movement that's not static, but alive and carries us together. I suppose, having had the opportunity to reflect on the last 10 years of the Justice Desk within the context of the work of the Presentation Sisters in Ireland and England and across the world, I really do feel privileged. Through this work, I've come to know the sisters from many congregations, as well as the priests and brothers, each carrying their own story, their own mission, and their own commitments. And yet, across all of these spaces, there is something strikingly familiar. those who founded these orders, those who began these movements, shared a common spirit of courage, conviction, and that refusal to wait, just like Nano. She didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for perfect conditions. She trusted deeply and she acted. And her example poses a question today. Where are we hesitating, or are we hesitating? Because there will always be reasons to delay, to postpone, to overthink, but to put something off until another time. But we must ask ourselves, what is the cost of that hesitation? Nano stepped into the darkness carrying a light, not because she could see the whole path, but because she trusted enough to take the next step. And perhaps that's what we're being asked to do now, to have that same faith, to step forward even when the way is unclear, to trust that in moving and in acting and responding, we will find our way. And in responding and in reflecting over the last 10 years, I find myself recognizing the shift in the call. The work has evolved, yet the need for it has not diminished. Indeed, it remains more urgent than ever and probably always will be. I've had the privilege of sitting on many different congregations with sisters. Through all of these encounters, one truth has stood out: their fearlessness, their compassion, that speaking truth to clarity, that act and carrying a deep sense of purpose. What has become increasingly clear is that this mission, Nano's mission, is not someone else's to carry. It is ours. We're entrusted with confronting it, and we must do so with the same courage, conviction, and passion that have defined Nano Nagle herself. So as I come to the end of my presentation this morning, and as we're all gathered here, I want to say how privileged I have been for having been invited to speak. And if I may, I'd like to finish on a more personal note, maybe. 10 years ago, before I took up this role, I had been extremely unwell for about 4 years. I am a primary school teacher by profession, and I loved the work. I truly, truly loved it. I never, ever imagined doing anything else. So when that chapter came to an end, it was really, really difficult. I was effectively retired from service by the Department of Education in Ireland because I was just no longer physically able to do the job. And they were right. But accepting that reality wasn't easy. It felt like an ending that came, but not on my terms. So at the time, I thought perhaps I might find something gentler, something where I didn't have to stand up all day or talk all day, something maybe less physically demanding. And this job, 3 days a week, came up. And it didn't require me to be on my feet all day. And I thought, I'll apply and see what happens. So I did, and I got the job. And I didn't quite tell them lies. I just didn't tell them the whole story, that I wasn't feeling particularly well when I applied for the job. I often think back to that first year, and there were days when I didn't think I'd make the next. I'd set small tasks, just get through this meeting, get through this task this week, then another responsibility and another deadline, and bit by bit, step by step, things began to get that little bit better. But 10 years on now, and I look back, I'm really deeply grateful to the Presentation Sisters for their patience and their understanding and the opportunities that they've given me. The inspiration of Nano Nagle has shaped not only the work I do, but how I understand my own journey. She's helped me to look back on my years on teaching, not with regret for what I've lost, but with gratitude for what I had. 31 wonderful years in school, and that's no small gift. But then to turn around and face what comes next, not with fear, but with openness, to see each new chapter as an opportunity to work with what I have, to play to my strengths, and to do my very best. For me, that's the quiet miracle of Nano Nagle. Her influence is not only found in the work that inspires us, but in the personal transformation she invites within us. The way her spirit of care, courage, and compassion continues to shape our lives. And perhaps most importantly, her light does not belong to the past. The light of Nano lives on through you, through us, and through our shared mission. So once again, thank you so much indeed for the opportunity, for your presence, for your shared commitment, and perhaps I might leave you with a few questions to reflect on as we look forward to the next 10 years. 2 questions, and then I'll stop talking, I promise. What stays with you from what you've heard today? And in this Jubilee year, how can I respond as Nano did? So I'll stop.